Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pull List Priority, the show where we give you all of the comic book plot and none of the comic book filler. I'm your host, Adam J. And, let's just put this out there. This episode's a little late. I like to try to get my episodes out on Wednesdays. This one's going to be releasing on Thursday. It's going to be a little bit behind, but that won't happen much. I won't say it won't happen again, but it won't happen much. Wednesday is going to try to... I thought about switching it to Tuesday, but I think Wednesday is going to be the day that I consistently try to release this show. Another sort of housekeeping thing that I want to address is I'm going to stop naming the issues that I'm going to be covering at the end of the episode for the next week's episode, because I don't want an instance like today where half of the issues that I mentioned are all filler. I thought that I created a list of issues that based on information I could find online through various sources of issues that I thought were essential, that were just plot and no filler. But I found out that the list that I have has some filler still and is missing some plot and doesn't always have some of the information I got is just wrong. So 3 of the issues that I mentioned last week that we'd be covering this week we're not going to be covering. We're actually just going to be covering 3 new issues this week. And I think one of them is pretty good. One of them is pretty interesting. One of them is good. One of them is interesting. That's 2 different issues. But yeah, I'm gonna stop saying what issues I'm going to be covering. I might give you an idea as to the characters that we'll be covering, but I'm not going to tell you we're going to be looking at Action Comics number 13 next week. You know what I mean? Just to sort of cut back on the expectations that you might have going into the show, thinking, oh, okay, well, this episode, if you went into this episode immediately after the last one, you might think, oh, we're going to get 3 issues this week, or 6 issues. No, it's just 3. And also, I don't want you to have to read along with me. The whole point of this is that you don't have to read. I do the reading for you, and I report back to you. So I don't want you to have to... I think on the first episode, or maybe even last episode, I said, if you want to read along, check out these issues. But that's the whole point of this podcast, is that you don't have to read along. You can just listen to the podcast. So yeah, for a whole host of issues, or reasons rather, I won't be naming which specific issues we're going to be covering. With all that said, for today's episode, we're going to be looking at... I feel confident saying this now because I've already got all my notes prepared. So we're going to be looking at Action Comics number 20, which I think is probably my favorite story for this week's episode. Action Comics 23, and then All American Comics number... Did I write the number down? Yes, number 16. So All American Comics number 16, Action Comics number 23, and Action Comics number 20. Now, all 3 of these issues are pretty important in the characters that they're going to be covering. So we're going to do we're gonna go through these issues as we've done on every episode so far, and talk about what's interesting about them and what's important about them. So Action Comics number 20, the Superman story in this issue was written by Jerry Siegel. It was penciled and inked by Paul Cassidy, and the editor was Vincent Sullivan. So in this issue, Clark goes to his boss and asks for a vacation that he was promised, but his boss says, actually, it's going to be a working vacation. I'm going to send you to Hollywood. So he's touring around one of the movie studios, and he has telescopic vision. All right, that's one of the things that we know Superman has. So with his telescopic vision, Clark sees a would-be assassin up in the rafters try to kill one of the actresses, but Clark stops him. The actress is named Dolores Winters, and Dolores thanks Clark and says, I owe you my life. And Clark says, okay, well, could you give me an interview? And she says, yeah, great, I'll see you tomorrow night. So they make a date for the next night where Clark will interview her. But when Clark goes to see her the next day, the next night rather, she says she's not interested in being interviewed, and she sends him away. She tells her bodyguard or the guy outside the door, outside of her room, that she's not interested in seeing anyone. So, Clark thinks that's kind of strange, but doesn't really do anything about it. The next day, though, he grabs a newspaper, and the newspaper says that Dolores Winters is retiring from acting, and she's throwing a retirement party on her yacht. But Clark isn't interested in going. However, once all of the people are on the yacht, right, it's a bunch of directors and producers and actors, just some of the richest people in the world, or in Hollywood at least. Once they're all on the yacht begins to set sail. And everyone's surprised. And Dolores, along with several men who we have not seen up until this point, pull guns on the guests of the yacht. So Dolores is taking everyone hostage. A man is like, "Oh, this is just a stunt. You're just trying to, make the news." And he starts to walk away, and Dolores shoots him, like just in cold blood, kills him right there. The next day, there's a newspaper headline again that says that the boat that Dolores was having her party on has gone missing. And Dolores gets on the ship's radio, and broadcasts a message saying that she wants $5 million to release her prisoners. I looked up the conversion rate. That's about $115 million in today's money, which is an outrageous amount of money, but also, it makes sense if it's a whole bunch of directors, actors, and producers. So Clark goes to the studio, where Dolores will give answers as to how to deliver the ransom, but his press credentials don't get him in. So Dolores is going to deliver a message somehow to someone about how she wants the $5 million delivered to her, and Clark is trying to figure that information out. But again, like I said, his press credentials don't get him in. He comes back as Superman, and he just jumps over the wall and scales the building, jumps over the wall to get into the studio, finds the building with the producer, scales the side of the building, and finds the manager's office and hides in the room next to it. So this is never explained in the comic, and I made a note of it hoping it would be, but it isn't. So the manager is sitting at his desk, and then a piece of paper just appears on his desk. I'm not using my own visuals to confirm that. The comic says that it materializes out of thin air, but they don't really address it. So there's this message on a piece of paper that appeared out of thin air, and it tells the manager to bring the money to a lighthouse at midnight. And Clark, with his Superman rather, with his X-ray vision, reads the note in the manager's office. So Superman heads to the lighthouse and hides when he sees a motorboat coming. He goes underwater, and he sees the motorboat tie a case full of money, presumably, to a buoy and throw the money down into the water. The case with the money. A submarine comes by and grabs the buoy and the money, and Superman holds onto the submarine while it travels. We have a line from Superman where he says that he's traveled for 2 hours, and then he finally lets go of the submarine when it approaches near a cave, an underwater cave. So Dolores gets her money, but she doesn't release anyone. She says she never intended to release anyone. She tries to kill them, but Superman stops her. And then Dolores, this is the most interesting part, or this is almost the most interesting part. We'll get to that in a second. Dolores threatens to burn her captives with a torch. So Superman's coming at her. She grabs a torch, and she threatens to set one of her captives' faces on fire if he comes closer. And Superman rather, looks at Dolores and notices this look on her face that he recognizes from someone else. And Dolores reveals herself to be the Ultra Humanite. I thought the Ultra Humanite was done. I thought we weren't going to see him anymore. But he's back. And he's Dolores Winters. I love it. Dolores was kidnapped by the Ultra Humanite, and his brain was placed in her body. That's the explanation that we get. The Ultra Humanite is back, and he has taken over Dolores Winters' body. Superman blows out the torch with his super breath, and the Ultra Humanite dives into the water to try to get away from Superman. Superman dives after, and he's gone. Or she is gone. Dolores is gone. The Ultra Humanite's gone. However you want to say it. The captives overcome their captors, right? Remember the men that pulled guns on them. They somehow overcame them while Superman was underwater looking for Dolores / Ultra Humanite. And then they take the submarine back to safety. And then back at the Daily Star, Clark runs the story about Dolores and is praised by his boss. And that is Action Comics issue number 20. I love this issue. This is probably my favorite issue that we've read so far, but it wouldn't have been my favorite if we hadn't had the 3 issues last episode of the Ultra Humanite. Right? Or 2, maybe it was 2 issues, I can't remember. But if we hadn't had, I thought the Ultra Humanite was gone. I did not expect to see him again. But I was so surprised when Dolores Winters turned out to be the Ultra Humanite. It's my favorite. So far, it's been my favorite story. All right, so that was Action Comics 20. Now we're moving on to Action Comics 23. The Superman story in this one is called Europe at War Part 2. I didn't get the name of the Superman story last time. So this is part of a series of stories that don't really have a place in the Superman canon. So we're not going to be covering all of them, but we're going to be covering this one, and you'll see why. There's a very, very important Superman character introduced here. So this one was written by Jerry Siegel and penciled by Joe Shuster, inked by Paul Cassidy, and the editor was Whitney Ellsworth, who has taken over as the executive editor from Vincent Sullivan since Action Comics number 20. Now this is Action Comics 23, so just a couple of months in between this, but there's now a new executive editor for Action Comics, Whitney Ellsworth, who is the editor for this story. Alright, so we joined the story in the middle of the action because, like I said, it's part of a series of stories. Europe at War Part 2. So Clark and Lois are on assignment in Europe working for the Daily Planet. This is the first time that it's not the Daily Star, again, the Daily Planet, and as we know, it will be the Daily Planet for the rest of time. And Clark is carrying an unconscious Lois Lane into a building where he leaves her. As Superman, he accepts a shell, or he intercepts a mortar and throws it back, destroying the thing that launched it. We don't really get a good look at what launched it. We just see that Superman grabs it and throws it back. Lois wakes up and Clark tells her that Superman saved him and she just missed him. And Lois is upset again because she's in love with Superman. Clark and Lois meet with General Lupo, who is the leader of one of the warring factions in a European country that was made up for the comic. And they talk about putting an end to the war, and Lupo says he's sending people to negotiate a truce to the other country. Superman wants to get pictures, so he tracks them down with camera in hand. But the car carrying the people on their way to have the peace talks blows up, and peace talks are over. So Clark confronts Lupo, who says it was an accident, and he would have never violated peace talks. However, Clark listens outside Lupo's door, and he seems highly suspicious. Superman trails his car when he leaves. Clark follows Lupo to a mountain, where Lupo disappears into the mountain. And I didn't like the way that was phrased. I wish that it would have said something about him opening a secret passage or something, because that's clearly what happened. But it just says he disappears into the mountain. Now Clark, being Superman, rips open a hole in the side of the mountain, sees the passageway, and goes down it. He sees Lupo standing at this wall with these colors and shapes and strange markings and lights. And a face appears on the wall. Lupo says to the face and to the wall that the war will be prolonged and, quote, your plans have been carried out. So Lupo's working for someone, clearly. Superman confronts Lupo, who says that it's Luthor's plan to engulf Europe in war. Now, we know that name, Luthor, right? But Superman asks who Luthor is, because he doesn't know. A laser suddenly shoots out of the wall that Lupo was just talking to and cuts Lupo in half. The laser trains on Superman, but of course he's not hurt. Superman destroys the wall that the laser came out of, and the cavern starts to crumble around him. But Superman escapes. So, while he was down speaking with Lupo and trying to figure out who Luthor is and what the plan is, Lupo told him about some bombers that were on their way to go bomb the country that his country is warring with. And it was part of Luthor's plan. So, Superman escapes from the collapsing cavern and smashes the planes together. I don't know how he does that, but that's what it says he does. And then as Clark meets with the leaders of the warring countries, he tells them that the war is being perpetuated by outside forces. They don't believe him, or they say they don't believe him, and one of them goes to Luthor, who is this white guy with red hair. Now we know that most depictions of Lex Luthor, he's bald. And he will be bald soon. But in this particular portrayal of Luthor, he is a redhead. So anyway, one of the leaders goes to Luthor, and Luthor tells them to take care of the reporter, Clark. However, they kidnap Lois. And Lois is brought up into a blimp high above in the sky where Luthor is hiding. He asks the men who captured Lois, why they captured her. And the kidnappers say that Lois is a friend of Clark, and she could help get to Clark. She could help them get to Clark Kent. The guards take Lois away, and this is never explicitly stated, but they're hypnotized. They're under some sort of spell from Luthor. But Lois notices that one of them is not under Luthor's hypnosis. And she asks him to take a note to Clark, or she'll tell Luthor that he isn't really hypnotized. And he says, if you do that, I'll die, so yeah, I'll bring the note to Clark. So he brings the note down, flies down in a plane, brings the note, gives it to Clark, and then flies back up. Well, Superman sees the guard flying away and jumps up after him, and he lands on the platform of the blimp, which is hilarious and amazing. He takes out the guards on the platform and breaks into the blimp and rescues Lois, but when her life is threatened, Clark agrees to be taken to see Luthor. Basically, he's taking Lois out of the blimp and is going to take her back home. One of the guards threatens Superman, and he's like, I'm invincible, you can do whatever you want. And he's like, yeah, you may be invincible, but she isn't. And then he goes and sort of gestures to Lois, and Clark, and then Superman agrees to be taken to Luthor. Luthor tells Superman he wants the world to go to war, so that when every country is weakened, he can then assume control. So that's Lex Luthor's master plan. And they never call him Lex, they only call him Luthor the whole time. But we know it's Lex Luthor. He changed Superman to a wall, and those lasers that we saw earlier come out of the wall that were and cut General Lupo in half. There are 4 of those lasers now, and he trains them all, and Luthor trains them all on Superman. And Superman feels his strength being zapped from these lasers, but he frees himself from the wall and destroys the laser machine. Superman grabs Lois and Luthor and runs to the control room, defeating guards along the way. Superman destroys the controls, then jumps out of the blimp with Lois as the blimp crashes down. Clark once again meets with a delegation from the warring countries, and they agree on a truce, and Clark and Lois go back home. And that is the end of Europe at War Part 2 from Action Comics number 23. Now that is a very important story, clearly, because that's the first introduction of Lex Luthor. That's the first appearance of Lex Luthor. Possibly the greatest supervillain in all of comics, but up there with some truly greats. If not the greatest, one of the greatest. I think we can all agree on that front. So that's the end of those two. That's the end of Superman for this time, for this issue. But now we're going to look at All American Comics, number 16. The story we're going to be looking at is called The Green Lantern. That's right. Actually, All American Comics number 16 was the introduction of the Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Not Hal Jordan, not Guy Gardner. They all come later. This was the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. And you'll notice he has an interesting backstory and weakness compared to a lot of other Green Lanterns if you don't already know. So, typically, Green Lantern's weakness is fear, or more colloquially, the color yellow. This Green Lantern, Alan Scott's weakness, we'll get to, but it's not fear. But there are some similarities that we see with Green Lanterns later. So let's just jump into the story and we'll talk about it after. So this was written by Bill Finger. It was penciled, inked, and lettered by Martin Nodell, and the editor was Sheldon Mayer. So Alan Scott is an engineer who built this new trestle bridge and is on a train that's going over the bridge as the comic opens. And he's worried that his company bid on the contract to build the bridge, and he's worried that the warring company, who also bid on the bridge, is going to be unhappy, and they're going to try to sabotage the bridge. Decker is the man's name, the head of the other company. And of course, then the bridge collapses and everyone dies except for Alan Scott. And when Scott wakes up, he realizes that he's still holding the Green Lantern that he was holding in the train when the bridge collapsed. But it starts glowing this weird light and it makes him faint. But there's the spirit of this lantern that starts speaking about its origins to Alan Scott's subconscious. So in ancient China, this is the origin story of the Green Lantern. A green metal of some sort came from outer space and burned with a green flame. These people sort of surrounded it, and a voice came from the flame, saying it will burn 3 times. The first time it will bring death, the second time it will bring life, and the third time it will bring power. So one of the men who witnessed the metal falling from the sky is a man named Chang, and he decides to make a lantern from the metal. But other people who also were there think that the lantern and that Chang are evil, so they try to kill him and destroy the lantern. However, the lantern burns green and kills everyone. That's the first of the 3, right? Burn 3 times, the first time it will bring death. The lantern eventually sort of makes its way around different countries with different people, but it finds itself in America in an insane asylum. And the lantern is given to a patient named Billings, who likes lanterns, and fixes it up, and sort of touches it up. And in return, the lantern glows and cures his mental condition, whatever it is, it doesn't say. And it gives him a new life with the second flame of the prophecy. And now the lantern will give power to Alan Scott, fulfilling the third flame of the prophecy. So his power, just like modern Green Lanterns, comes from his willpower and faith in himself. And the lantern tells him that. The lantern tells him Alan asks if he needs to carry the lantern around with him everywhere, and the lantern tells him instead to make a ring, and the ring will have to be touched to the lantern every 24 hours, but he needs to make a ring. So Scott goes home, Alan Scott goes home, makes the ring, and now his thoughts are put into actions. He just thinks something, and it happens. He thinks about flying off to go see Decker, the man who he's pretty sure is responsible for the bridge collapse, and his body just starts flying. So he gets to Decker's home, and he's like, I wonder if I'm able to phase through this wall, and he does. He phases through the wall, and as he's going through the wall, he hears the men talk about how they blew up the bridge. So he knows he's got the right people. When he arrives through the wall, they see him and they try to shoot him, and that doesn't work. They try to stab him, and the knife breaks. But someone smacks him on the back of the head with a wooden club, and that takes him down. Famously, Alan Scott's weakness is wood. Now, what he says in the comic is that, I'm invulnerable to metal. But what a lot of people remember is that Alan Scott is weak to wood. So we'll see how that goes in future comics. We'll see if that is true, or if it's just metal that he's invulnerable to. So is he invulnerable to metal, or is he weak to wood? Right? Which one of the two? Or is he invulnerable to just metal, or is he weak to just wood? Which one of those two is true? We'll see as we continue. We don't get the answer in this issue, but we'll see, I'm sure, in later issues. So Alan gets back up after being taken down by the wood, and he fights off the other men, and he sort of notices that his strength is still normal. He doesn't have any super strength or anything. When he gets to Decker, Decker begs for mercy. He says, please don't do this. I'll be your friend. I'll pay back. I'll confess. Whatever. And Scott grabs him and flies him through the air and threatens to drop him when Decker agrees to sign a confession. So Decker signs a confession and then immediately drops dead and dies. And then Alan Scott goes home, makes himself a costume because he says he feels this power was given to him to fight for justice. So he decides to make a costume and become a superhero. And that is the end of the Green Lantern's origin story from All American Comics number 16. So that was a lot, right? But that was a good issue. I think that that was probably my favorite as a story, just because I like origin stories. But as a standalone story, but when you consider all of the Action Comic stories with the Ultra Humanite before, and also the time that was passing between each Ultra Humanite appearance, right? Then I think that the Dolores Winter story is probably my favorite. Because if you think about it, right, there was a lot of downtime between. We're just getting these one after the other, right? We're just getting these immediately after each other, thanks to the podcast. But when these issues were first running, right, we saw the Ultra Humanite the first time in Action Comics 13, and then he appeared again in 14. But then he didn't appear in 15 or 16, and then came back in 17. And then skipped 18 and 19, and came back in 20. And I also thought that was the disappearance, I thought that Action Comics 17 was the end of the Ultra Humanite, but I was wrong. So, very happy to see that the Ultra Humanite is back, at least for one issue, and that is probably my favorite story. So if I had to recommend one story, it would actually be the Alan Scott origin story. But if you wanted to read multiple, I would recommend reading the Ultra Humanite saga, because those are some fun issues. So I know I said I was going to go over everything that I'm going to look at for the next issue. But I will give you a general idea as to some of the characters that we're going to be looking at in the next issues. So, the next issues are going to cover Batman and Flash. Batman and the Flash. Oh, and Hawkman. Hawkman will be there, as well as Robin. So we've got a lot of characters coming up. Robin, Hawkman, and the Flash with some Batman thrown in there. We're also going to meet the Joker and Catwoman. I'm not going to give you exact issue numbers, but that is what I'm looking forward to next. Then we're going to go back to Marvel. We're going to read some more Marvel mystery comics. The continuing adventures of Namor and the Human Torch. Then we're going to jump to... now, we're going to end next week's episode with the Flash comics. We're not going to go past the Flash comics. And then the following week will be Marvel Mystery Comics, where we go back to the Human Torch and Namor. And the week after that, we'll go to... we'll read about the Spectre and Dr. Fate. And then some more Superman, some Captain Marvel, and cap it all off in 4 weeks with the formation of the Justice Society of America. So to lay that all out again, next week we're covering Batman and the Flash. The week after that, going back to Marvel. The week after that, we're going to cover the Spectre and Dr. Fate. And the week after, and Superman. And the week after that, Captain Marvel and the Justice Society of America. And that will be the end of 1940 for our comic book timeline. So that's the end of this episode of Pull List Priority. I've sort of fallen behind on the Twitter, but we are on Twitter. You can still find us there. I was trying to update it whenever I put out a new episode, but I sort of fell behind last week, and it got away from me. But I will try to be more active on Twitter following this episode. And you can find us at Pull Priority Pod on Twitter. Pull Priority Pod. It's Pull List Priority, a history of Marvel / DC Comics. You can also find us on Spotify and on YouTube just by searching Pull List Priority. In a few months, we'll be on Apple Music, but for now, just on Spotify and YouTube. But building a small following on those platforms, and I'm pretty happy with the reaction so far to the podcast. So we're just going to keep rolling along, and if we get more listeners, so be it. But if we never make it out of Spotify, that's also fine too. So next week, look forward to some Batman, some Flash, some Robin, and some... who was the other character I said? Oh yeah, and some Joker and Catwoman. It'll be a fun episode. But until then, I'm Adam J. This has been Pull List Priority, and keep reading comics.